Empires, inventions, corporations, all fell the same way. Not by accident, by design. The land tax on Bengal farmland went up by 10% in the same fiscal year the monsoon failed. The company's collectors did not wait to see if the harvest would recover. They sent Sepoys, hired guns on a corporate payroll to enforce that number at the point of a bayonet before a single official in Calcutta had written the word famine in a report. The tax rate was not a reaction to conditions on the ground. It was fixed before anyone knew what the ground would produce, and it did not move when the ground produced nothing. To understand why that number could not move, you have to go back 5 years to 1765 and to a man named Shah Alam II. He was the Mughal emperor, ruling in name over territory he could no longer defend, and in that year he signed over the Diwani, the right to collect tax revenue across Bengal, Bihar, and Odisha to the East India Company. Robert Clive negotiated it. London celebrated it. For the first time, a private trading corporation held sovereign taxation power over roughly 20 million people, and it held that power without holding any of the responsibilities a sovereign is traditionally expected to carry. No obligation to feed those people in a bad year, no constitutional check, no parliament looking over its shoulder, not yet. Just a board of directors in London and a shareholder base waiting on dividends. This looked, on paper, like the best deal in the history of colonial finance. A corporation had acquired the tax base of an empire without the burden of governing it as an empire. The company's own directors described the arrangement as a triumph of efficient administration. What they had actually built was a machine with a revenue input and no pressure valve. The men running Bengal's districts did not answer to the people paying the tax. They answered to shareholders in London who wanted to see the same number, or a bigger one, every single year, regardless of what happened between planting and harvest. That is the system. Now here is the flaw baked into it from day one. The company's revenue collection contracts were structured as fixed quotas set before the harvest results were known. Local zamindars, the land-holding intermediaries responsible for collection, were personally liable for hitting that number. Not the actual yield, the number. When the rains failed in 1769 and failed again into 1770, the fixed quota did not adjust downward to reflect a smaller harvest. It stayed exactly where it had been set because nothing in the contract structure allowed it to move. The zamindars, facing personal liability for any shortfall, had exactly one rational option: extract the full quota anyway, from a population that now had less grain to extract it from. Company administrators in the districts made the same calculation one level up. Reporting a shortfall to the court of directors was not a moral failure in their eyes. It was a career-ending admission of incompetence. So collection continued at full rate through 1770. In some documented districts, it increased. Nobody in that entire chain of command, from the village collector up to the council in Calcutta, was rewarded for reporting famine conditions. Every single person in that chain was rewarded for hitting the number. That is not a detail. That is the entire mechanism. A system that penalizes accurate reporting and rewards quota completion will produce exactly this outcome every time the harvest drops below the fixed line. And the harvest dropping below the fixed line was never a hypothetical. It was a mathematical certainty waiting for a bad year to arrive. What makes this worse is how long it took anyone outside Bengal to even know what was happening. A ship carrying correspondence from Calcutta to London took 6 months or more to complete the crossing. That is not a footnote. It is the reason the men making decisions for Bengal's population were reading reports that were already half a year out of date by the time they opened them. But the delay was not only physical, it was structural. The company's accounting system recorded revenue collected. It did not record population lost. There was no line item in the ledger for famine relief, because none had ever been budgeted. The architecture of the accounts simply had no category for the possibility that people, not yields, would be the variable that failed. Company correspondents from within Bengal acknowledged mass death in villages and along roadsides months before London took any action at all. The men on the ground knew the number kept getting collected anyway. If you want to see the next collapse that was engineered years before anyone called it a crisis, subscribe now. This channel exists to find the decision, not just report the disaster. By 1770, the death toll in Bengal had reached a scale that could no longer be absorbed quietly into a shipping delay. Estimates place it at roughly 10 million people, close to a third of the entire population of the province. Bodies along the roads into Calcutta became difficult for even distant observers to ignore. And here is where the sequence of events matters more than almost anything else in this account. Parliament did not intervene because the system had failed. Parliament intervened because the failure had become too large to hide. The Regulating Act of 1772 was the first time the British state placed any formal check on East India Company governance. It is often described as a correction. It was not a correction. It was an exposure event. The moment the outside world was finally forced to look at a mechanism that had already guaranteed this outcome in 1769, 3 years earlier, the moment the fixed quota met a failed harvest and did not move. Was this the only time a fixed extraction system met a population it could not feed and refused to adjust? It was not, and it would not be the last. The same architecture appears, with different names and different centuries attached to it, in the Irish Land Acts, where rent obligations continued through famine conditions with the same rigid indifference to yield. It appears in Soviet grain requisition quotas under Stalin, where local officials faced execution for reporting shortfalls and so reported none, while people starved behind the number. It appears in modern structural adjustment quotas imposed on debtor nations, where fiscal targets are fixed independent of the human capacity to absorb them. None of these systems required a villain twisting his hands in a back room. They required only a target set in advance, a punishment for reporting failure, and a reward for hitting the number regardless of what hitting the number cost the people underneath it. That is the pattern. Different century, different flag, same ledger logic. The East India Company's own account books for the fiscal year 1771, the year immediately following the worst of the famine, show record profit margins for Bengal operations. The record does not explain that number. It simply shows it.